Sacramento Kings head coach Mike Brown has named Kevin Huerter the starting shooting guard, and it's the absolute right choice. Plus, things to watch out for in the Kings and Trailblazers preseason game tomorrow, right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off-season. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. They have you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News here in the California capital. And I was actually not at Kings practice over the last couple of days, choosing to spend some time with the family. Did pay attention to the notes, some of the comments out of training camp, including Mike Brown saying that Kevin Huerter was going to be the starting two guard, or I think at least things were trending towards Kevin Huerter being the starting two guard, which I think we all knew was the direction that the Kings were heading in, seeing as how Kevin started at the two in game one of preseason against the Los Angeles Lakers. But this has been a topic of conversation really since the Huerter trade and the Malik Monk signing, is who is going to be that starting two for the Kings. Many even threw Davion Mitchell into the hat. Some are believers in Terrence Davis and believed he should have been in the conversation. To me, it's always been between the two of them. And if you've listened to Locked On Kings since these moves were made and really over the course of this offseason, you know that I've always preferred Kevin Huerter over Malik Monk as a starter, and seeing a small sample size of him with the starters against the Los Angeles Lakers, I'm not saying that that is definitive evidence as for why the Kings should go in this direction and have gone in this direction. But to me, Kevin Huerter is the absolute right choice at starting shooting guard, and it does not have to do with him being a significantly better player than Malik Monk. I think both of them give you a lot of similar advantages, especially in terms of shooting and floor spacing, but also a lot of them, or both of them rather, provide a lot of different advantages. A lot of Malik Monk's advantages, personally, I feel better fit this Kings team or help this Kings team coming off the bench. But for me, one of the things that makes Kevin Huerter so valuable as a starter and the right pick as a starter for the Kings is he's overall just more versatile, and that includes the offensive and defensive side of the floor. And honestly, it's a natural versatility due to the size advantage that he has over Malik Monk. Kevin Huerter, being that 6'6", 6'7", is capable of switching on defense. He's capable of, like I said, guarding multiple positions, spaces the floor just as well as Malik Monk does if you're looking at three-point shooting percentages over the last couple of years. So to me, the versatility is what really gives Kevin Huerter the edge in this conversation. When you're talking about someone who offensively fits what the Kings are trying to do, someone who goes out there and opens up space for De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, but can also be a cutter. Now, Malik Monk, of course, can too. Kevin Huerter can create with the ball in his hands. Malik Monk can too. So it's not like the differences between the two of them on the offensive floor, end of the floor, are that significant, except for the fact that Huerter can play both the 2 and the 3 when Malik Monk is really limited to the 2, or maybe even the 1. And I do think there might be situations where maybe Kevin Huerter or Malik Monk are asked to play the 1 a little bit. Now, hopefully the Kings don't have to worry about any kind of injuries to De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell over the course of the season, but I think there's a very real possibility that the choice can be one of the two of them playing that 1 as a third-string point guard, instead of the Kings giving a roster spot to a Quinn Cook or a Matthew Dellavedova in the event that they wanted to give that roster spot maybe to a Chima Maneke or someone else on this training camp roster to give more maybe wing depth or big man depth or shooting guard depth. Regardless, Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk are both capable of playing that 1 spot. I trust Malik Monk, I think, a little bit more maybe at that 1 spot just because of his size, because of how I believe he can create with the ball in his hands. I also think he's an underrated passer. But when we're talking about the starting conversation here, when we're talking about someone who is going to be a part of a unit that gets the Kings going. Starting lineups and closing lineups, two very different things. I have no idea if Kevin Huerter is going to be on the floor over Malik Monk or even Davion Mitchell at the shooting guard spot when the Kings are closing games. A lot of that's going to be situational. But starting should be consistent. And what Kevin Huerter does is he consistently gives the Sacramento Kings a presence at the 2 or the 3 who is switchable on the defensive end of the floor, who's more well-known for his defense. And look, Kevin Huerter is not a lockdown defender by any means, but I trust Kevin Huerter more defensively than I do Malik Monk, mainly because of his size. And plus, we've seen Kevin Huerter play a lot more as a starter than we have Malik Monk over the course of his career. Maybe a lot more isn't necessarily the right term, but I've seen Kevin Huerter be a more effective starter on winning teams than I have seen Malik Monk over the course of their careers. Kevin Huerter has started 216 of the 274 games that he has played. He has an incredible amount of experience as a starter, both as a shooting guard and at times as a small forward, which could play a factor in how this Kings season goes. Maybe they decide to make another move involving Harrison Barnes at the trade deadline and move Kevin Huerter to the 3. Maybe things aren't happening at the starting 4 spot. Maybe Keegan Murray and KZ Okpala both aren't working out at that spot, and you move Harrison Barnes down to the 4 and put Kevin Huerter at the 3. He's versatile, and he's experienced as a starter in those positions. Plus, you look at his splits. Now, these are just some numbers. I wouldn't base a full argument off of this, but these are just some numbers to provide a little bit of context for Kevin Huerter as his time as a starter versus his time coming off of the bench. In terms of scoring, he's a better scorer as a starter. His averages are higher, mostly because as a starter, he gets more minutes than when he is coming off of the bench, so I wouldn't read too far into that. What I will read into, however, are his splits when it comes to his offensive and defensive rating. So as a starter, his offensive rating is 109. As a bench player, his offensive rating is 100. Now, as a defender, his offensive rate or defensive rating is 117 as a starter, 115 as a defender. Remember, offensive rating, the higher the better. Defensive rating, the lower the better. So statistically, he's actually been a better defender coming off the bench than he has been as a starter. But remember, we're talking about 200-plus games to 50 games. So it's a significantly higher sample size, significantly more minutes playing against Tier 1 or the starting caliber competition consistently throughout his career, which is why I look at those numbers. Believe it or not, his usage rate is actually lower as a starter than it is coming off the bench, which I think works perfectly with the Sacramento Kings and what they're trying to do. Kevin Huerter is at best in the starting lineup a third man. I would say more than likely going to be a fourth man, depending upon what the Kings do with that starting 4 spot. If they do start Keegan Murray, which I think they eventually will, then I think Keegan is going to be that third option. Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter then could compete for the 4th or 5th option. There might be times where Harrison Barnes is the third option and it's Huerter and Murray competing for 4 and for 5. But usage rating being lower as a starter doesn't concern me because I think his usage rating is going to drop a little bit because of who he's playing with in the starting lineup in Sacramento. But that doesn't mean that his scoring can drop off, especially as a 3-point shooter. If he's going to get as many open looks as I think he is going to get because he's playing with Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, I expect him to hit those at a higher clip. And then, like I said, overall, his scoring is better as a starter compared to coming off the bench with a significantly weighted sample size in that favor. When it comes to Malik Monk, I've said this when Brendan Nunez and I were doing our series on training camp battles. I truly think that Malik Monk is at his most optimized, not necessarily his best, but his most optimized for the Sacramento Kings coming off of the bench, because I trust Malik Monk more as a volume scorer than I trust Kevin Huerter. Now, I expect Kevin's offensive numbers to hopefully, his points per game especially, to hopefully get higher than his average for his career, which is around 12 per game. I'm hoping that gets upwards of 14, 15. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm hoping for it. I think the Sacramento Kings are going to need that from him. Malik Monk has the capability of putting up 14, 15 points in 12 to 15 minutes. And that volume microwave scorer off the bench, I think, is far more effective than having that volume microwave scorer in the starting lineup when so much is going to go onto the laps of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis offensively with that first group. I think Malik Monk is a 6th Man of the Year candidate. I think he's essential for the Kings offense with that second unit. That does not mean that we're not going to see Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox playing together. In fact, that's one of the things I hope that we'll get to see a little bit on Sunday against the Portland Trailblazers in preseason game 2. But overall, I think Malik Monk is more useful and more optimized for the Sacramento Kings coming off the bench. Then when it comes to Terrence Davis, all indications point to if he's going to crack the rotation, it's going to be as a 9th or 10th man at best, and I think it's going to be more as a wing than as a backup too, if we're being realistic. And Davion Mitchell, while I do think there are going to be times with him and De'Aaron Fox on the floor together, especially with the minutes, I think Davion Mitchell is going to demand to play. I shouldn't say demand. It's not like he's going to go to Mike Brown and say, you have to play me this many minutes. What I mean is Davion's going to be so good and so useful, especially on defense this year, that the Kings have to get him more minutes than just a backup point guard. But when De'Aaron Fox is out of the game, those minutes belong to Davion Mitchell. So if Davion is going to play as a starter, I just don't think it works, personally. It could work. You could find a way to stagger those minutes as best as you possibly can. I think it makes the most sense for both Malik Monk and Davion Mitchell to come off the bench and be the backcourt with that second unit that can provide some defense. We know Malik Monk is focusing more on the defensive end of the floor. Malik provides that consistent offensive firepower, and Davion Mitchell hopefully is able to add or continue the offense that he showed at the end of last season. I think Kevin Huerter is the absolute right choice for the Sacramento Kings as a starting shooting guard. I know that is not the thought of everybody. Maybe it's the majority, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. Let's talk about it. Reach out to me at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or let's talk about it in the YouTube comment section down below. Kevin Huerter, the right choice? Would you rather it be Malik Monk, Davion Mitchell, or Terrence Davis? We'll chat about it. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline is the #1 source for your football betting information happening right now and all season long, not just professional NFL football, but of course college football. In addition to that, you can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game you can find. And of course, as we switch really from fall into the winter months, of course, basketball betting hits the ground hard, but with preseason going on right now, yes, you can bet on that. Regular season odds for NBA championships, win totals, things like that. Rookie of the year odds, if you're interested in that, for Keegan Murray, you can bet on all of that right now. And then, of course, once opening night starts and the Kings take on the Portland Trailblazers for real on the 19th, there's no better odds maker out there, no site that is going to give you, no sports book that is going to give you better odds and better lines than what BetOnline gives you for Kings games. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every single sport out there. They even have MMA, boxing, and golf. Great betting right now for the MLB playoffs. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. I will be at the Kings preseason game with the Portland Trailblazers tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to watching this team play in person. I'm also, if I'm being honest with you, looking forward to seeing Shaedon Sharpe in person. He had quite the debut in preseason for the Trailblazers, and it's great to actually see him playing basketball. So I'm looking forward to seeing him, but I'm also looking forward to seeing this Kings unit play consistently together. And here are some of the things that I'm going to be looking out for, maybe some questions that I hope to have answered or at least addressed over the 48 minutes of this preseason game. Number one, KZ Okpala. I expect him to get the start again. All signs point to KZ Okpala continuing to be the starter for the Kings at the 4 spot. In fact, even if I do think Keegan Murray should be the starter right now, and I would pick Keegan Murray, KZ, I think, deserves more than just one look in the 10 minutes that he got in preseason game 1. Since Mike Brown says his rotation is going to be a little more accurate, he's going to go to a 13 to 15-man rotation, he said, instead of the 20-man rotation, getting everybody some playing time in preseason game 1. It gets a little more realistic. Still deeper than normal, but a little more realistic, so that means we should probably get longer looks at some of the starting units. a better idea of rotations, and hopefully a longer look at KZ Okpala. And while defensively, of course, I want to see some things that justify the decision to have him as a starter, offensively are where the big question marks are. So what does KZ Okpala's offensive output look like as a starter? Is he knocking down open shots? Is he a part of the transition offense? I want to see that. Also, Keegan Murray, I do expect him to come off the bench. Can Keegan Murray simply keep it up? He had 16 points in 21 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, against the Los Angeles Lakers, 21 if you round up. Keegan is, or has already proven, at least to me and to so many others with his play in Summer League, with his play in that first game, that he absolutely belongs. But is he going to continue to make it really difficult on Mike Brown and the Kings coaching staff to not start him? That's, of course, what I want to see and what I want to pay attention to. In terms of the rotation, who is 16 through 20? Like, which guys do we know are not making it? Is it Sam Merrill, which I kind of expect? Is it Chima Maneki? Is it Matthew Dellavedova? Is it Quinn Cook? Is it Kent Bazemore? Like, who are the 5 guys that don't play? I think that's going to be pretty telling. And I think we have a good idea of what the groups are. We have the starting 5, which includes KZ Okpala. You have the bench 5, which is Mitchell, Monk, Davis, Mitchell, Monk, Murray, Lyles, and Holmes. Then you have kind of that third unit, which looked like it was Sam Merrill, Terrence Davis, if I'm not mistaken. Alex Len was in that group. Chimezi Metsu was in that group. And the 5th is probably pretty obvious, and I can't remember who it is. Regardless, we have kind of ideas of who most of those 15 are going to be. So is this game going to be an accurate representation of, as of right now, where the Kings are leaning for their overall roster spots and roster cuts? Maybe Neemias Queta and Keon Ellis don't get playing time because we know they're going to be two-way guys. So just because they're not playing doesn't mean they're not actually going to be part of the team going forward. We'll hopefully have answers to those questions. I want to see something that we didn't see in Game 1, which is Domantas Sabonis and Richaun Holmes playing a little bit together. I want to see if that could potentially work. Don't worry. I do have an update on both of those guys who do not participate with the Sacramento Kings in training camp today. I do want to see a little bit of Kevin Huerter playing the 3. I want to know what that looks like. And when he does play the 3, does Barnes slide to the 4? Is Keegan Murray playing the 4? Like, what does the lineup look like when Kevin Huerter is at the 3? Is Malik Monk at the 2? Is Davion Mitchell at the 2? Is De'Aaron Fox still at the 1? I want to know what Mike Brown is thinking if he's going to use Kevin Huerter as a 3, just like we know at times he's going to use Keegan Murray as a 3. First off, how do those players perform at those spots? And second off, what does the supporting cast around those players look like? So those are things that I'm going to be paying attention to come this game against the Portland Trail Blazers. I hopefully will have some answers to some of these questions that we'll be able to talk about on the post-game edition of Locked On Kings, which I'm hoping to be able to do live, or I shouldn't say live. I will be able to record it from the Golden One Center after the game, like I'm planning on recording a lot of podcasts this season after the game. Of course, if you're going to the Golden One Center at that game, please let me know. Would love to chat with you before the game, say hi, and I'm looking forward just to having, of course, Kings basketball back inside the G1C. Couple notes from Kings training camp. Even though I have not attended the last couple of days, still keeping tabs on everything going on. You might have seen it reported by a couple of different sources here in Sacramento. But Richaun Holmes has not been with the team for the last couple of practices. He is out with a non-COVID related illness. He has not, or we have not been given any kind of word on if that's going to affect his playing time with the Sacramento Kings tomorrow. Of course, if he is not playing, that throws my desire to see him and Domas playing together out the window, at least temporarily, but we'll have to wait and see. And if he does not play, if he is out, I assume Alex Len steps up and takes his role, but maybe Neemias Queta gets some looks. That would be interesting to see. And then Domantas Sabonis did not participate in today's training camp practice, because he was away for a personal issue. Nothing injury-related, nothing illness-related as far as we know. A personal issue, probably some kind of, or personal matter. It's not even an issue. Could just be a matter, something to do with his family or whatever it may be. So I'm not really reading too far into that. I have not heard any reason to believe that Sabonis will not be playing come Sunday's game against the Blazers, so I wouldn't really worry about that. Richaun, definitely a question mark at this point in time. As soon as I have any kind of information on that, I'll be sure to share it, especially on Twitter, @MattGeorgeSack. And speaking of Twitter, you may have noticed that My pinned tweet on my account is that Sacramento Kings opening night ticket giveaway that I'm doing. All you have to do is respond to that tweet with a picture, a video, a story, a memory of the Sacramento Kings or your time with the Sacramento Kings, anything like that, and you're entered to win a pair of Lower Bowl Section 116 opening night tickets to Kings Blazers for real on the 19th. So go and enter that. Whether you're a longtime listener or a brand new listener, you, of course, can enter. It's my thank you for an excellent summer here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Of course, thank you for your support. Again, I hope to see you tomorrow at the Kings preseason game against the Blazers, and I will have a post-game edition of Locked On Kings at some point after that game, so I hope you join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.